Trancers, 1984, a cheap, scrappy, time-traveling cyberpunk noir that's somehow both wildly dumb and quietly brilliant. Directed by Charles Band, a man not exactly known for subtlety, this movie tosses together time travel, zombies, and a hard-boiled future cop named Jack Deth. Yep, that's his real name, Jack Deth. And the plot? Jack time travels by inhabiting the body of his ancestor. Way before Assassin's Creed made it cool in the video games, Jack travels back to 1985 Los Angeles. As a kid, I loved this film. Tim Thomerson was the coolest, and who didn't fall in love with Helen Hunt? But rewatching it as an adult, I can't help but wonder, does it hold up? Does it have anything to say? Did the director even understand the story he was trying to tell? Let's find out. Okay, so Tim Thomerson plays Jack Deth, a hard-boiled cop from the 23rd century who travels back to 1985 Los Angeles, hunting down psychic zombie-like villains named Trancers. He does this by inhabiting the body of one of his ancestors, which honestly is kind of interesting, but also really creepy when you think about it, which we'll get into that later. In any case, written by Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, and directed by none other than Full Moon legend Charles Band. The man, the myth, the VHS emperor of low-budget horror and sci-fi. His fingerprints are all over this, from the tone, to the casting, to the bonkers practical effects. While rewatching Trancers, I can't help but notice that this very solid script with two terrific charismatic leads is painfully held back by some of the direction. Charles Band might be a cult legend for building an empire of weird VHS sci-fi horror, but let's be real. As a director, he's strictly serviceable at best, clumsy at worst. Some of the scenes just drag on too long, especially in the early second act, and he holds shots on people's faces like 2 to 3 seconds after they're done delivering their lines or expressing their emotions. Furthermore, the action beats don't escalate with the urgency that they should. In other words, this film has some serious pacing and editing problems. Even worse, the shot composition. Almost everything is shot medium and flat, like he's just trying to get coverage before the police kick him out for filming without a permit in an alley in Los Angeles, and he's not really trying to tell a story supported by really tight visuals. Occasionally, there's some neon or smoke that suggests a visual style a la Blade Runner, especially like the first 15 minutes, the introduction in the future. But other than that, the framing never really capitalizes on the story that's being told or supports the story being told in any artistic and creative way. You can tell he just doesn't really know how to move the camera with intention, or he just didn't care about it. It's just always static and awkwardly shot. It's all function, no flourish, like someone storyboarding with a ruler and a headache. Again, Band is great at getting the job done on a shoestring budget, and he built an empire that made a lot of our childhoods. But I don't think he ever mastered the art of shooting a film in a way that supports the story or the actors' performances. And the worst part about this is you have these two brilliant performances by Tim Thomerson and Helen Hunt, who are great together. They've got genuine chemistry and this weird rhythm that works. But Band's direction doesn't highlight it. The actors have to carry the film for him. A better director might have leaned into their connection and brought out the noir meets romance angle in this Blade Runner environment with much more confidence. But my biggest gripe with this film, and I know I'm sounding pretty harsh, but my biggest gripe with this film is the city of Los Angeles should have been a character in the film, but Band blew it. Think about it. You've got a cop from the future, a future where LA is underwater, and the movie begins with the main character, Jack Deth, discovering a sign of Sunset Boulevard as this archaeological relic from the past. This same cop then travels back in time to 80s Los Angeles, the exact cultural moment when Los Angeles should have been oozing with personality. This is a film screaming for a gritty, atmospheric LA to anchor it down. In movies like Blade Runner or even Repo Man, LA isn't just a backdrop, it inflects the narrative. You feel the heat, the desperation, the neon rot. The city itself reflects the characters' inner lives. Trancers is a noir time travel thriller that drops its protagonist in 1985 and then completely forgets to make LA matter. In a genre built on atmosphere, Charles Band directs like a man who sees location as an obstacle and not an opportunity to tell a story. Where Ridley Scott made LA into a haunted, choking future city, Band points his camera at whatever alley wasn't already being used to shoot a porno and just fucking calls it good for the day. At least that's the impression I got. It's a failure of cinematic world building, and it matters because noir needs the city to participate. When LA becomes just an empty stage, the existential weight of the story almost falls flat. Now, all that criticism of Band aside, and I know I'm being overly harsh, but there is one thing we need to give Band credit for. First, forget everything you've been told. The Matrix did not invent bullet time. Trancers did it first in 1984. That's right, Jack Deth was dodging slow motion bullets while Neo was still learning Kung Fu. The tech was cruder, the budget was far smaller, but the concept fully formed. Charles Band accidentally stumbled into one of sci-fi cinema's most iconic tropes, and barely anyone noticed at the time. Almost 2 decades before Neo dodged bullets in the Matrix, Jack Deth was strolling through frozen time with a busted watch and a bad attitude. This means that Band, despite his otherwise unremarkable direction, inadvertently pioneered a genre-defining visual language that would take another 15 years to perfect. But innovation alone doesn't carry a film, especially when it's wrapped up in bad pacing and uneven camera work. Fortunately, this film succeeds despite its directorial limitations because Tim Thomerson and Helen Hunt absolutely kill it in their roles. Their performances suggest they understood the story they were telling better than Band did, and they made the film work regardless of some of its uninspired direction. And again, I'm not saying Charles Band did a terrible job with the directing. He didn't. He directed just fine, and that's the problem. It was just fine. It was rote, workmanlike, and serviceable, and just largely uninspired, and that's the biggest flaw. And honestly, if that's the worst criticism you could give him, he actually did an okay job. But speaking of the story, let's examine some of the surprising thematic depth buried in this 80s gem. Trancers isn't exactly subtle or high concept in how it presents its themes, and I doubt the filmmakers intended any of this. They were clearly just going for a fun sci-fi romp, and by all accounts, they succeeded. But there's definitely more going on under the surface than the budget or the B-movie vibe suggests. The first one and most noticeable as an adult is the body theft and metaphysical horror of its time travel device. As a kid, I just thought, cool, he's a cop from the future traveling back in time. But as an adult, I can't help but realize this is completely non-consensual ancestral possession. Jack Deth literally steals the body of his great-great-grandfather, Phil Deth, and the movie never even acknowledges it. What happened to Phil? Is he asleep? Is his consciousness suppressed? Is he trapped in some otherworldly alternate universe in horror? Is he sitting there screaming silently while he's watching his great-great-great-grandson Jack use his body to shoot people and hook up with Helen Hunt? We never find out. The closest we come in the film is when Jack Deth says his brain's on hold. What does that even mean, his brain's on hold? Look, Charles Band movies aren't exactly known for their philosophical exposition, and I don't think he was trying to write an academic dissertation on personal identity and the ethics of time travel. But the implications hit hard if you stop and think about it. This is existential horror disguised as VHS pulp. And in all fairness, that's why you're not supposed to stop and think about it. It's just supposed to be a fun sci-fi movie, and you just go with the plot, and ultimately that's how I watch it. But still, as an adult, I can't help but not bring it up. Some other social commentary is that this film, when put in the context of its time in the 1980s, it opens the door for discussions on embodiment and the instability of identity. The Trancers themselves are essentially mindless drones controlled by Whistler. They represent the fear of mass conformity, cult mentality, and the loss of individual will. It's very 1984, very Invasion of the Body Snatchers. When you consider this film in the context of 1980s Reagan America, it's a Cold War paranoia metaphor, fear of ideological brainwashing, whether that be the communists, religious fundamentalism, or corporate indoctrination. things that were happening in the American zeitgeist in 1984. The idea that your neighbor could already be one of them is classic American anxiety. Psychologically speaking, the Trancer phenomenon taps into profound human fears about losing autonomy and agency over our own minds. In the hyper-individualistic Reagan-Era, when personal freedom was celebrated as the ultimate American value, the concept of having your will completely overridden represents the ultimate violation. This narrative emerged during a period when public consciousness was saturated with stories of cult programming and brainwashing. From the aftermath of the Jonestown massacre to growing concerns about mind control techniques. This film cleverly transforms these real psychological anxieties into science fiction metaphor. Another theme in the film that really stands out is the future of LA as this desolate, gray, and basically underwater submerged dystopia. The past, 1985 LA, is this neon-lit punk rock mess full of crime, sleaze, and cynicism. Not exactly a paradise either. So in other words, the film paints both timelines as failed states. The future is sterile and authoritarian. The past is chaotic and lawless. Neither offer salvation. It's a cynical take on American decline and the failure of both progressive idealism and conservative law and order. And in some ways, maybe they got the future right. When you look around at some of the things we're dealing with right now in the United States, it's pretty authoritarian. So in conclusion, Trancers, does it hold up? For sci-fi and genre fans, yeah, mostly on the strength of the two leads who elevate the material far beyond its budget. I mean, Tim Thomerson is fantastic, and who didn't fall in love with Helen Hunt in this film? But does the film have anything to say? Surprisingly, yeah. Probably not on purpose, but through the chaos, Trancers stumbles into themes of identity, agency, trauma, and decay, all wrapped up in a straight-to-VHS wrapper. So my final verdict, Trancers is smart enough to be fun and weird enough to be worth talking about. If you dug this breakdown, hit like, drop a comment, and let me know what other underappreciated sci-fi weirdness you want me to dissect next. Thanks for watching.